Okay, welcome to the album that changed me with your host, me, Casey. Hey, lovely to have you all here. It's very odd because I'm also filming this at the same time, and I feel like 2 times more self-conscious than I would have if I were just recording a podcast without a visual component with it. But you know, you live and you learn and you adjust, and that's the important thing. Like, am I supposed to look at the camera the whole time, or am I, like, I don't know. It'll be a learning curve, but for your sake, I hope that you are just listening to this, because my, like, audio presence is significantly better than my visual presence, but what can you do? I also have to hold the microphone up while I'm talking, because I have not figured out how to take it off of the little stand that it comes with. So, you know, we are living and learning, and that's all we really can do. So go team. So like I said, this is the album that changed me. My name's Casey. If this is the first episode that you're listening to, that's probably for the best, because this is the first one that I'm recording. This used to be jams. Love jams very much. I talked about music and I just analyzed things, but I kind of wanted to switch things up, and we're making the album that changed me, because for years I hold music to such a high standard, and like, it is my entire life and I love it so much, and I think that I have a lot of albums that make me who I am, and I figured, let's talk about that, let's share it, and let's share like why it makes me who I am. And down the line, I have some guests that are going to come on, aka my friends, my mom, my dad, maybe some other people later on, but that's the guest lineup coming up. So look forward to that, who will be talking about like the albums that have changed their lives, and like what role music plays in their lives and all that kind of stuff, just because I'm really fascinated by it. And I had this idea like probably 3 years ago and then just never did anything with it. So we're doing something about it today. So yay, go team, we're finally doing it. It's about time, but we got here. We took the scenic route, but we have arrived, essentially. So, like I said, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, it's probably for the best, because this is the first one that I'm making. And for this inaugural episode that I am making, I figured I would talk about the first album that comes to mind when someone prompts me with the question of what album has changed you. And this will be extremely cliche, and I'm already waiting for all the groans and all the sighs and all the reallys. But the album that changed me, the one we were talking about today, is none other than the Beatles' Abbey Road. I know, okay? But I have a pretty solid reason for it. Trust me. So, to talk about it, I would have to go all the way back to when I was, like, really, really little. So, I'm 23 now, and when I was younger, I have my dad, who loves the Beatles, and I have my mom, who hates them beyond belief. She believes that they're snot-nosed, they don't sound good, she doesn't understand it, she doesn't understand all the hype and all this other stuff. So, like, I was raised with the very polarizing opinion of the Beatles are great, they revolutionized music, and the Beatles are bad and overrated, essentially. And when I was little, I wanted to be just like my mom for whatever reason. Not that she's not someone to look up to, but like, I don't know, when I was like 5, 6, 7, I was like, my mom is who I want to be 100%. Like, I don't want us to have any differences or anything like that. That has changed, but that's besides the point. And so I hated the Beatles because she hated the Beatles. And I distinctly remember hating the Beatles for that reason. Like, if anyone were to ask me, like, oh, why don't you like them? When I was younger, I was like, oh, my mom doesn't like them. And it's like, it's basically the equivalent of like, oh, my mom said I can't come. Like, there's no reason behind it, but that was like my ride or die answer, was like, my mom doesn't like them, so I don't like them. And thankfully, my dad came into my life. He's been in my life. He's been there the whole time. My dad, he would do this thing where he would play hooky with us. So he would take us out of school, or he wouldn't play hooky with us. He would take us out of school and we would like go to work with him and like get lunch and hang out. And it's like, it was the best. Those are like some of my best childhood memories. So he took me out of school one day when I was 8, And I don't remember much of the day. I know that we got hot dogs from this place that was near his office that was like really, really famous for their hot dogs. And I don't remember much else. And so then the thing that I really remember, which is, you know, coming full circle here, is that he drove me back home. Like, we were driving home. We were crossing the GW. We were about to cross the GW to go back into New York. And he was like, why don't you like the Beatles, essentially? And I'm like, oh, Mom doesn't like them, so they're not good. And he's like, can I play you something? And then you can make the decision for yourself. Because my parents are very big proponents of, like, I will give you the resources, and then you make the decision yourself whether or not you want to, like, believe this thing or do this thing, commit to this, blah, blah, blah. So he was like, I will play you an album. Just let me play you an album, and then you can make the decision yourself. And 8-year-old me was like, yeah, that's fine. That's fair. And so he played Abbey Road for me. And I remember distinctly hearing Here Comes the Sun while entering the top level of the GW Bridge, and the sky was really blue. And that was the moment that album changed me completely. At 8 years old. I was 8 years old. What did I know? But, like, I'm 23 now, and I'm like, that's the album that changed me completely. Because my dad, like, before that moment, I think that I just saw music as, like, something to listen to, which is fine, obviously. Like, that is really first and foremost, I guess, what it's for. And, so I figured, like, you know, music is something that you listen to, blah, blah, blah. Like, my parents took me to a bunch of concerts when I was younger, like Jimmy Buffett and the Indigo Girls and all that other stuff. So, like, they definitely made music a big deal in our household, but I, like, never paid attention to it because I was, like, 8 years old. And before that, I was even younger. So, like, why would I pay attention to it? I remember listening to, like, Britney Spears and the soundtrack to, like, different movies. I distinctly remember listening to the soundtrack of Happy Feet. Unfortunately, that album did not change me, so don't expect me to be talking about the soundtrack to Happy Feet anytime soon. But I just saw it as something to listen to because I was so young. Like, what else would I know, really? I have to fix my posture. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the camera and I'm understanding that I probably look like a gargoyle. But anyway, I saw music as something that was just like a pastime. You have it on in the background. It doesn't really matter, blah, 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 etc. And then my dad showed me this album, and he told me all the stories behind the songs and, like, how in the end, which is, like, you know, the whole shebang, the end for the Beatles, like, they all thought that it would be good to have a solo. And I think it was Ringo who, like, didn't want a solo. He was like, don't make me do that. But they made him do it anyway because, I mean, it was the four of them. It was their way of saying goodbye to everything that they've been doing. So like a big goodbye to that chapter of their lives. And so someone was blasting music from their car, and I appreciate it because that's what we're doing here, but now is not the time. So, like, telling me that he didn't want a solo, the whole reason of Octopus's Garden is because Ringo doesn't have many songs on the album, so it's like, why not do that? And Golden Slumbers, oh my gosh, to this day, I still cry at Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight and all that. Like, he would tell me, like, because this was the first time that I heard anything about them. This is probably the first time that I heard their music, and it's the first time that I learned that they had any cultural impact. And, like, say what you want, I know that there are a lot of people who don't like the Beatles, and, like, I get it. Like, there are people that say John Lennon's not a great guy, and, like, true. And, like, they were very problematic to an extent, but, like, you do have to give credit where credit is due, and that they did change a lot of music, and they did change a lot of, like, what is considered mainstream and all that kind of stuff. And, like, you don't have to like them, but, like, you can at least, like, give credit where credit's due a little bit, that, like, they definitely did something big. And so that was the first time that I was learning all of that. That's, like, the first time that I was learning that music could have that kind of impact, that it could do this to people, that it could mean this kind of thing to people. And I was, like, completely enamored by it. I was in awe. And, like, my dad continued to tell me all these stories about how, like, this was their goodbye and that they couldn't figure out where they wanted to take the picture for the album cover. So, like, they were arguing that it should be on top of, like, not, like, on top, but, like, on the Himalayas or, like, on a mountain. They argued that it should be, like, in some, like, spiritual location, and then one of them was just like, you know what, we're doing it outside. We're going outside and we're doing it outside. And so I think that that's, like, hilarious, and it's, like, learning that you could know the stories behind things and, like, why artists are doing what they're doing, and, like, really just the purpose behind all of it was so fascinating to me because I never saw it that way before. And, like, I remember, this is gonna be so embarrassing, but, like, I remember, because I was like, I want to see the Beatles, because my dad neglected to tell me that half of them were dead, which, like, of course he did, because we were listening to Abbey Road, and he was just like, yeah, this is the end of, like, their band, but, like, he didn't tell me that, you know, they died, 2 of them, which, like, of course, it's not like you're gonna be in the car, like, having this lovely moment with your daughter, who's 8, and be like, yeah, so then the guy singing that, he was shot outside of his apartment, and the other one died of cancer, and it's like, that's, you know, maybe not the time for that. So I remember when we got home, and I was like, I like the Beatles now, and, like, I became obsessed with them and their music. And I distinctly remember, this is so embarrassing, but I distinctly remember being like, I want to see them live. Like, because my dad saw them live, which is incredible. And he was telling me about it, and I'm like, I want to see them live. And then he told me that 2 of them were dead. Not to mention the fact that they weren't a band anymore. So, like, I wouldn't be seeing them live anyway because they weren't the Beatles anymore, even if John and George were still alive, but that's besides the point. And when he told me that, I was devastated, and I remember distinctly crying in my bed, being like, I want to see the Beatles. It's like so funny to look back on, because it's like that moment, I can cite that specifically as to how everything changed for me, which is why I thought it was important to talk about this album specifically for my first episode, because I think that this is the one that did it for me. And I became completely enamored with everything the Beatles. I watched their movies, because if you didn't know, they had movies. Hard Day's Night, Help, big fan of those movies. They had a cartoon series, but it wasn't voiced by them, but the songs were still played by them, obviously. But the voices were just really good impersonators, which, like, kudos to them. And I became obsessed with, like, all their albums. I would ask my dad to tell me the stories behind every single song, because my dad, like, knows these things. My dad, his capacity for knowledge is insane. It's absolutely baffling. And so we would talk about it all the time. It became, like, our thing. And even today, like, anytime we drive anywhere, he puts the Beatles channel on, and, like, we talk about the interviews that they have on, and we talk about, because sometimes they'll do, like, a ranking of, like, the top 100 Beatles songs, and we're like, why is that on the list? Why would you put that on the list? I'd put this here. And, like, that's, like, still our thing today. We went to Beatle Fest. I think it's called Beatle Fest. I took down the ticket. I had the ticket hanging up in my room, but I don't remember where I put it. Because I'm moving soon, so I had to, like, put things in boxes. But we went to Beatles Fest, or Beatlemania. It's a festival for Beatles fans. And it was, like, so bizarre, because there are some hardcore fans, and my dad and I, like, we still had such a good time, because it's, like, all these very odd people who are, like, super fans of the Beatles, and my dad and I just, like, hanging out, and, like, I don't think I've definitely mentioned it to him, but I don't think he maybe 100% understands, like, how much that one moment, I think, changed everything for me. Because my dad would then talk about, like I said, the stories behind all the songs, and how imagery plays such an important role in, like, Eleanor Rigby and Penny Lane, and, like, you can really picture what they're singing and picture it like a story. And then what are some other stories? We talk about it, like, we've talked about it so much that, like, the stories kind of blur together for me. I have no idea how he's capable of, like, remembering all of them, but more power to him, because I really wish that I would remember this kinds of, like, all those stories, because, like, how, like, their discography and the amount of stuff that they just put out into the world is insane. And so, like, I just think it's remarkable that, like, my dad can remember all this stuff, because I can't at all. But, like, we would talk about the stories all the time, and, like, why things were written a certain way, and also how they were produced, and, like, the interesting ways that they would manage to produce some things, and how they would get certain sounds to happen, and how a lot of it was, like, pretty, like, a lot of people thought it was, like, out of left field, and it was pretty revolutionary for the time, and it's, like, it ended up paving some of the way to how we produce and record songs today, which I thought was really cool. So it's, like, not even just talking about the Beatles themselves, but their production team and how they recorded and all that other stuff, and their friends, and how they learned to write certain songs and what their inspiration was and how they started, and the fact that Ringo wasn't even in the band to begin with. And so he just told me all these stories, and I think, like, obviously there's a truck, excuse me. Obviously at 8 years old, I don't think that I thought of it this way, but, like, in the hindsight that I'm putting in, I think that him telling me those stories is what makes me capable of being able to so easily cite why albums have changed my life, because of that one day, really that 1 hour it took to get home, because it always takes so long to get home from New Jersey. But that 1 hour where we just talked about the stories behind Abbey Road and the songs, and I asked all these questions, and him telling me that there is basically poetry in all this stuff, and how even the instrumental parts have meaning, and how they construct things has meaning. And I think that that really solidified how I approach music to this day, and probably for the rest of my life. Because when I listen to an album for the first time, I'm always thinking that. I go on Genius Lyrics all the time to, like, look up whether or not the artist has contributed to, like, what the meaning of the song is and all that, or who has contributed to it, because I love other people's ideas too. But, like, I'm so invested in how things were made and why they were made and why these songs were written the way they were, and how they managed to get that sound, and why they decided to make it sound like that instead of making it sound a different way, why they made it a ballad instead of something more upbeat, or vice versa. And I can 100% say with full confidence that it's because of my dad and because of Abbey Road specifically. Maybe I'd give some more credit to my dad, just because it's my dad, obviously. But I have to give credit where credit is due. Like I said, I gotta give credit to the Beatles. They did that with Abbey Road, and it completely changed my life. I can consistently go back to Abbey Road, and I am transported back to being 8 years old in the front seat of my dad's car when was that? That was oh my gosh, was that 15 years ago? Oh my gosh, was that 15? Oh my gosh, that was 15 years ago! That's insane. I'm glad you all got to listen or see me put together how long ago that was. Jeez. I'm instantly transported back to that moment, and to learning all about the stories and the meanings. And, like, he showed me that music could be much more than what I thought it was. And once again, at 8 years old, you don't think much of anything, but looking back, I can see that that was probably the formative moment where I learned that music could be much more than I thought it was. And I carry that with me to this day, and like I said, probably for the rest of my life, because of my dad and because of Abbey Road. And it also, not to mention, taught me that you should give things a try before you form an opinion on them, and maybe don't just do everything because your mom's your mom's opinion aligns with a certain way. So my mom's really into 70s disco, and my dad hates that. So, you know, we all have that one genre that we just can't get behind, or that one band that we just can't get behind. And for my mom, that's the Beatles. But I learned the valuable lesson of trying things before you decide that you don't like them. And so that's the album that changed me. Mainly because, and the thing that I think is interesting is that I can't even tell you most of the stories that my dad told me about Abbey Road specifically, now, I could, if you gave me enough time, I could probably remember them. I remember like the Octopus's Garden. I remember The End, Golden Slumbers, and Carry That Weight. Just the idea that they recognize that for the rest of their lives, they're gonna carry that weight of what they were. Like, that's incredible. How is that not like absolutely insane when you learn that, you know? Like, my dad telling me like they were such a big deal, and this song is basically saying like, us four are the only ones that are ever going to understand what this was. And us four are going to have to carry this weight for the rest of our lives, because we will never not be this, even though we're not in the band anymore. Like, they'll always be the Beatles, even though they aren't the Beatles anymore. Like, I am very fortunate. I got to see Ringo Starr. My dad took me when I was really little to see Ringo Starr. And then a couple years ago, my dad and my mom brought me and my friend to see Paul McCartney before we went to study abroad. And I'm very fortunate that I got to see the last survivors of the Beatles, the remaining Beatles, half of the Beatles. And even they play Beatles songs when they're on tour, because they know that they're carrying that weight for the rest of their lives. That's who they are for the rest of their lives. No matter how many creative endeavors they have, no matter how many side projects they have or main projects. I mean, Paul McCartney and the Wings, like, yeah, there are people that know him because of that, but you will always know Paul McCartney as the Beatles. Like, there's no way that you wouldn't. And so just the fact that they put that in the song, and they put that in the end part of the album, like Golden Slumbers, in to carry that weight of just like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about Golden Slumbers now and I'm getting really sad. It's just such a good song. Like the whole Once There Was a Way to Get Back Home. Oh my gosh, I can't. If I start talking about like Golden Slumbers even more than I already am, I'm gonna start crying, and this is the first episode. But anyway, the fact that they like put that in the album and they acknowledge like how big of a deal they were, and how much of an impact that they had, not only on their fans, but also on them, like, and on each other. Like, they recognize that they will carry this weight for the rest of their lives. And I just think that that's, like, incredible writing. And I think that even if it wasn't incredible writing, like, or incredible music, it would still be, like, this really moving piece that they even recognized that. And they had, like, the foresight to basically own up to that, like own up to the fact that they're going to carry this weight for the rest of their lives, and they are the only ones who will fully understand. And so the fact that like I can't really tell you all the stories on Abbey Road, like, it bums me out a little bit that I don't remember all of them. Like I said, if you had given me enough time, because you guys put so much pressure on me to make this, if I had enough time, I was a full-on bulldozer. What the hell? If I had enough time, I would be able to, like, remember more stories. But the fact that, like, even though I can't really remember the stories all that well, and yet this, like, I can't remember the stories all that well, but regardless, it completely changed how I view music. And it changed how I view music the past 15 years. I will always listen to something and I will always think of like, oh, how'd they do that? Why do you think they did that? Why do you think that the lyric was like that? And like, is that annoying? That's debatable. I think it's interesting, but like my mom, for example, like doesn't think about that stuff. She doesn't really care, which is why I'm really excited to have my mom on as a guest, because our way of viewing music is completely opposite. I'm very excited. But like, she doesn't think about that stuff. Whereas my dad and I are always like, oh, well, they did it like this, and they wrote this line because of this, and maybe they were going through this thing at the time. And just really anything like that. Like, not even analysis, but just like thinking and taking a lot of consideration into the amount of care that goes into music, and the amount of care that goes into like the whole production and the writing aspect, like the amount of effort and care that people put into the stuff that they put out into the universe is insane. And I know it's because of Abbey Road that I feel this way about music today. And I can say that with full confidence. It's because of my dad, and it's because of Abbey Road. Because if he had not told me the stories on that album, maybe I would get to the point where I view music the way that I do today, but it would definitely take me a lot longer. I would not have learned that at 8 years old. And because then I started like listening to music and I would create stories in my head around it, because I was like, oh, the Beatles had all these stories, so like there must be stories behind these things. And it just kind of snowballed into what I do now, which is why I'm here doing this for all of you. So yeah, I think that Abbey Road is really just like what did it for me. And once again, I know that people kind of feel polarizing about the Beatles. A lot of them think that like they didn't really do anything that remarkable, but I do have to think that even if you don't like them, like I said, give credit where credit's due. And even if you don't like them, like I've definitely grown up and realized that they weren't such stellar people as I thought they were when I was 8 years old. Like everyone thinks that John Lennon is like this like pillar of peace and all that, and it's like, no, well, that's not really the case. But like, oh my gosh, I had my 16th birthday at the Strawberry Fields in Central Park. That's how much I loved this whole thing. So that's another embarrassing fun fact about me. And so yeah, like you grow up and you learn that like the people in the band aren't exactly who you thought they were, but like nevertheless they still wrote Abbey Road and they still put all those stories in there. And like it's really, like I keep saying over and over again, it's my dad and it's Abbey Road that completely changed me and how I view music. And I count it because, and I count my dad in there, even though my dad's not an album, clearly, in the whole like why I am changed because of this is because I think that Abbey Road is one of the albums that changed him. And if he wants to be a guest on my podcast, you will find out what album changed him. Maybe it is Abbey Road. Maybe you'll actually get to hear those stories that I have neglected to tell you. So I think that it's something that really changed him. And if it hadn't changed him, then I would have never been changed because of it. So I just like the recognition of kind of like the cyclical thing. So I'm really thankful to that album. It gave me a relationship with my dad that I treasure so much, and it gave me a relationship with music that I treasure so much. Like, the Beatles, I think, will always be my dad and I's thing. He could tell me anything about them, and I am taken right back to being 8 years old, enraptured in the moment, enraptured in the story. And like I said, it changed my relationship with music. It gave me a way of viewing music that's like kind of like a story, like a nonstop story. And I absolutely love that way of looking at it. I love what that album has changed for me. Not only has it given me something amazing with my dad, but it has given me a relationship with music I'm really proud of. I love finding out the reasons why people wrote certain things and how things were produced. I love the stories behind everything. So if it weren't for Abbey Road, I don't think that I would be doing this podcast. Just period. So thanks, the Beatles. And of course, thank you to my dad. Like, once again, like this first episode, like, is really just is me saying like my dad is the reason why I'm making this, because without him, I don't think that I would have this relationship with music, really. So I thought that this was an appropriate like inaugural episode. Oh my gosh, my posture is back to being a gargoyle. I thought this would be an appropriate first episode because this was really the foundation of like why I started liking music so much, and why like this album is what made music like my favorite thing on the face of the planet. I don't think I could live without music, and I think it's because of this album. And so I figured it was an appropriate first episode. Like I kept saying and keep saying, it changed how I view music, and it changed my relationship with music completely for the rest of my life. So if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be here doing this specifically. I'd be doing something else. I don't know what, but I wouldn't be doing this, and that's the important part. So I figured that would be a nice foundation to this whole podcast of letting you know the first album that changed me, and the album that is the reason why I am here with you today. So I hope that was interesting. It's really just kind of like an origin story and a preface as to like what this podcast will be and like why I'm doing it, because I think that music is extremely important, and I think that music is something that is such a commonality between everyone. Like, everyone likes music, and I'm just really interested in finding out what are the albums that changed other people, because I have a list of albums that have changed me, and you'll hear about them, don't worry. But I want to know the albums that changed my friends' lives, and I want to know why a piece of music that is on an album that lasts maybe 40 minutes that was released years ago or yesterday completely changed someone. Like, there's so much power in music, and there's so much power in our relationship with music, and I'm fascinated in what it brings to other people, because I'm in awe of what it has brought me, and so I just want to know what it brings other people. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast. So I hope you enjoyed the first episode. I'm just gonna wrap it up at that, because I feel like I rambled a lot about the Beatles and about my dad and about me, but that is an appropriate first episode. So I really hope you enjoyed. You can find me on Instagram at The Album That Changed Me, no spaces or anything like that. And then what else? Oh yeah, you can find me on YouTube if you want to watch it. I'm the YouTube channel, The Album That Changed Me. So it'll be in the link of this description. Very professional. So if you want to find me there, wonderful. But all in all, I hope that you enjoyed. And that was the album that changed me. Bye.